welcome. I'd like to thank you for sharing your experience as military personnel, and it's because of people like you, the public are finding the truth out about the UFO issue. So if you could just introduce yourself and your background in the Coast Guard.
Yes, of course, Dr. Greer. My name is Shannon Lee. I'm now 39 years old. However, I was a 6-year veteran of the United States Coast Guard. I first enlisted back around, it was August of 2001. So it was about week 4 of basic training when 9/11 happened. And
Okay.
so that's kind of where it all began.
Okay. And tell us about your experience. I know at some point you were deployed to Guam.
That's correct. That right after basic training, unlike some of the other branches in the Coast Guard, you don't go straight to A school, or you don't go right into a particular school immediately. You have to go right out to the fleet and work and get on a waiting list. So yeah, that was my first deployment. I was immediately stationed to the island of Guam. So that was my first duty station.
And tell me, what were your duties there?
I was specifically stationed aboard the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Sassafras, which is it was a 180-foot buoy tender at the time. Since then, it has been decommissioned and replaced by the newer class of 225-foot cutters to do the buoy tending operations now. But the ship that I was on had been first commissioned back during World War II, so it was actually a pretty old vessel.
Right. And what is buoy tending for people who don't understand that?
Yeah, so one of the main job that my ship and all other cutters in that class, we focus on repairing or repositioning buoys and many other types of aids to navigation within the harbors.
Okay.
And channel markers for shipping lanes. So it basically consists of a very large boom, or a crane, I guess you would call it. And so we would oftentimes pick the buoys up out of the water, and then there was usually a pretty long length of chain. There was a pretty complex process of slowly bringing up the chain section by section, and then we would get to the concrete weight at the that's anchors it to the seabed, and then we would have to pull all that up and then scrape the barnacles off of them, clean them, and then replace them in the proper spot, because lots of times buoys, they get knocked around during storms. There's lots of typhoons out there. So it's constant, grueling work.
Right. And when did you first come across mentions of the UFOs being seen in that area?
Okay, yeah. So as soon as I got out there, when I first arrived on the island.
When was that? What year and month?
This would have been, I want to say probably around the end of November, maybe beginning of December 2001.
Okay.
When I first arrived there. And within the first few days, I started hearing about, people were talking about many UFO sightings that I was probably going to be experiencing. And the thing about it is, when I first got out there, the cutter was actually underway. It was out to sea, so I just ended up working with the shore unit for the first week or so. So, yeah, before I even got to see the ship, I had already started hearing, rumors that there were lots of strange stuff that they would often encounter.
And what were these, for example, what were they describing? What was being described? You had mentioned before the Marianas Trench and objects.
Yes.
So if you can go into that in some detail.
Yeah, well, there was mentions of, flying saucer type things that were seen a lot, objects even going in and out of the water that were frequently sighted. And the Marianas Trench is actually, officially, I think it sits 250 miles directly south of Guam. But we very frequently would sail right over that. That was one of our, that was a pretty consistent route that we used to take.
Okay.
And sure enough, as I came to find out in the next few months, that was very much true. I guess that would be the first time I ever personally experienced or witnessed with my own eyes what I would say was a UFO hotspot.
And what did you see? What kind of events?
There were lots of mysterious craft in the sky, oftentimes in broad daylight. The most common types of craft I remember sighting were specifically just basic saucer-shaped objects. And one characteristic I remember, which was, I don't know, it's kind of exciting, is that they seemed to, in a couple of instances, I'd seen them kind of morph shape. It seemed like they would morph from like a disc shape into like a ball, and then it's hard to describe, but it was like a shape-shifting craft that I witnessed on multiple occasions.
Okay, interesting. And then, are there any of those events that stand out in particular before the major event that you were involved with?
I think probably I'm going to say it's within a week or two before that event that we're about to get to. I had probably the clearest sighting of all. And it was pretty cool because I saw lights on the bottom of a craft, and I wanted to say, first, it was in broad daylight, so I got a pretty good look at it, and there were quite a few of us that were pointing at it, and we were just in awe. And it was a saucer-shaped craft, and underneath it there were 3 distinct lights, I remember, that just kept I don't know if you'd say they were rotating or flickering. There was some weird flicking motion going on with these lights, but then at one point they stopped, and I was looking, and there was nothing there, though, like that would indicate like a line or anything. It just appeared to be a solid metallic craft. I thought that was interesting how it was lighting up like that.
And was this when you were on the ship or on shore?
This was it was actually on the small boat.
Okay.
One of the ribs, the RHIs, we call them, rigid hull inflatables.
Mm-hmm.
I was out on a patrol just outside the harbor, and we were on a small boat.
Okay.
When I witnessed that.
And then there was a do you know if those were tracked on radar or responded to in any way by the military?
That I'm not sure, because the ship I was on at the time, we actually didn't have radar. We had sonar, for depth finding and whatnot. But as far as radar, I couldn't tell you or not if they were tracked or if they showed up
Okay.
there. But I do know for a fact, despite what I've heard from other people's stories, we did actually log it every time we would see one of these UFOs or flying saucers, whatever, what have you. We would definitely, mark it down and log it as a contact. So
Do you know what happened to those logs?
no clue.
Okay.
These were all handwritten logs.
Okay.
As far as I know, they were never digitized or computerized.
Okay.
So
now let's get into this major event that happened. Tell me how that day started, how the whole event began to unfold, just from the beginning.
okay, so yeah, the day in question here, it started out as we knew ahead of time that we had sailing orders. We were to leave at 0800. I still remember this, and it had been a while because we were constantly in a state of disrepair. So, just because of how old the equipment was and everything, we were, it had been, I'm wanting to say, probably a month and a half, maybe 2 months since we had last set sail, had the ability to. So we were well overdue to go out and do our standard drills and training, because we have a certain quota that we have to meet every month for fire drills, man overboard drills, general quarters, man your battle stations, that kind of thing. So yeah, we started out, and that's what our day consisted of, was lots of drills.
Okay.
And
when was this? You remember about what time of year or month?
yeah, so the exact day and month I'm a little murky on, but I can definitively say it was sometime around between October and December of 2002.
Okay. And what happened subsequently?
So I know that we were just wrapping up our last drill for the day, and we were getting ready to head back to the harbor and more up at the pier. And all I know is then we ended up getting a call from, I found this out later from the CEO, our commanding officer had gotten a call from a Marine helicopter. And I'm not exactly sure what was relayed in that call, but it was to the point where they sounded the general quarters alarm, which is, man your battle stations, and they said that they piped it over the intercom this is not a drill, GQ, general quarters, man your battle stations. So there was a lot of chaos and panic ensuing, because we weren't really used to that kind of thing as a buoy tender out there. So we ended up, I can remember at the time, there was only one vessel that was in sight of us. I just remember there was open ocean around us, and there was one vessel that was in the distance. and we started heading towards it. So as we got closer to it, then I noticed there was a helicopter that was kind of flying in the area. I guess you could say kind of shadowing it, but I wasn't really sure what was going on. And so the closer we got, then I realized there was a fishing vessel. Turns out it was a Taiwanese fishing vessel, and they had a very large metallic object that was, I don't know if it was tangled or stuck in their net, and they were kind of dragging it along with them, and they weren't stopping, even though apparently they had been given orders to stop, and they weren't doing it. Like they weren't like trying to get away because they were moving really slow, but we couldn't get them to stop. So it kind of took a while to finally get them to figure out what's going on, and then we sent out our small boat, and a couple officers that were on the boarding team went, and I remember seeing one or two of them on board. Like, it looked like they were arguing, but I think there was a little bit of a language barrier, so I'm not sure how we were communicating with them exactly.
So your officers boarded the fishing vessel?
Yes.
Okay. And then they got them to stop?
Yes.
Okay. And then what happened?
Okay. At some point in by the time we had gotten like really close, probably within 100 feet of the vessel, we were told to stand down from the GQ, the general quarters. And in addition to that, everyone was ordered inside. Everyone was ordered to go inside the ship. No one was to come out until further instructions. So, I'm trying to remember the exact sequence of events, like when that happened, but that happened right before the two officers had boarded their vessel.
Okay.
And
Well, just go through what happened. It's fine. Just what happened next and next and next and next. Like, it's just, you can just share, what happened sequentially from their point.
Yeah. So once we finally got them to stop and everything, again, I'm not exactly sure, what was said or, how they got them to do that, but I was in the engine room at the time, and we didn't do the whole course of that last general quarters drill. We didn't have any comms for whatever reason with the bridge. We didn't have any communications. Two of the headsets weren't working, so I ended up being the messenger between the engine room and then the bridge. And so next thing I remember is we were given the order to fire up the emergency generator, which was, that's what we had to do to use the boom, to do buoy operations. It was a backup generator, but it was also for the boom. So, and then we were told that the object that was in their net, that we were gonna, we had orders to retrieve it, to lift it out of the water. So that's basically what we started doing. There was a team. There was 6 officers, and there was 2 enlisted. I was one of the 2 enlisted guys that were part of this team that were allowed to go outside and help to lift this thing out of the water. And the first thing we had to do was they basically just cut away their net that was around it, you know. I'm sure they probably weren't too happy about that, but at the same time, it was a tangled mess. And so, yeah, we just ended up cutting their net away. And so one of the first things I really noticed is whatever this object was, it was very big for one thing, and it was floating too. It had some buoyant properties to it, which was pretty surprising, just given the size, the shape of it.
Can you describe the size and shape?
Yeah, of course. So it was I wanted to say it was probably between maybe 25 to 30 feet. It was perfectly round. It was a disc shape, or, you know, saucer, whatever you call it. It had a very dull silverish color, I guess, if that makes any sense. Like, it wasn't polished, and it was just weird. It didn't seem to give off any reflective properties or anything.
And what time of the day was this now?
This was probably, I want to say, late afternoon.
Okay.
You know, I'm going to say around like maybe 4 p.m.-ish, I'd say, when we started getting it on board, like retrieving it out of the water.
And you were above board and the others were below deck because you had a clearance, a top secret?
That's correct, yes.
So can you discuss that? And some, you know, that's why you were allowed up.
Yeah, I was later told that that's the reason why, because, you know, I definitely was confused and asked that question, like, why me? I'm just a junior enlisted. And the other enlisted guy, he was only, like, I was an E3 at the time, a fireman, and he was an E4. He was a quartermaster 3rd class. So, yeah, that's apparently why we were chosen. And, of course, the officers, I think all of the officers had to have the clearance just to be an officer, I guess.
And so what ensued then after you saw this in the net? They cut it loose. What happened?
So, yeah, we ended up, so we grabbed a variety of materials. I think one of the main things that we used to help create like a harness to lift it, because obviously all we had was a hook, and there's nothing to hook onto a smooth disc. So we had a lot of the mesh ladders that we would throw over the side of the ship. Sometimes, like if someone was to go out for a dive or swimming and then to climb back up on board. We had quite a bit of that material. It's very tough, very strong. And we ended up, I wasn't actually one of the ones that was out on the water doing that. I was on the deck at the time, but there was 3 officers that were worked on maneuvering this material underneath the craft in the water. And then sure enough, we got it to where it looked like it would hold, and then we ended up hooking the harness we had made to the boom. And so I remember when we lifted it, this object was heavy. Now, I could tell you, we were used to lifting some pretty heavy buoys. From what I remember, there were two sizes that we used to lift mainly. There was the 14,000 pounds, and then there was the 18,000 pound ones.
Mm-hmm.
And this went, I could tell by how far to the left we were listing at the time that this was way heavier than that.
Mm. Heavier than the 18,000 pound one.
Yeah, that's my main reference I could use
Mm-hmm.
for the weight that I knew that was capable of.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm wanting to say it was we were listed to the side on about a 45-degree angle, I'd say, if I had to guess. So it was pretty heavy. And we ended up, surprisingly, I had my doubts, we swung it up over the main buoy deck, and we got it. We retrieved it.
And how close did you get to it?
I touched it. I was right there.
What did it feel like, and what did you observe that close?
Okay. So actually, I think I was the very first one that did touch it, because well, I remember one thing I did, I pounded on it, like, just to see, like, if it was solid, if, was there something inside? And it gave off a very deep thud sound with a slight echo, so that told me that it was hollow to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
There was definitely some kind of cavity in there.
Could it be scratched? I think you mentioned that someone tried to tell me about that.
Yeah, whatever this metal was, it was like perfect. It would not scratch. And myself, and I remember another officer as well, we had 4 concrete weights that we kept on the ship just for buoyancy to balance it out.
Mm-hmm.
So there were little chunks that would break off. So I took one of those broken chunks and just tried, knocking, scratching, and it was amazing. We could not put a mark on it.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Were there any openings or windows or?
There was none. There was nothing.
Was it seamless? It had no parts or seams?
There was no seams at all.
No point of going in or out of it? No way to get in or out that you could see?
That's correct. It was completely smooth.
And so you mentioned it was about 25, 30 feet across. How high was it? How thick? Just an estimate.
I wanted to say probably maybe 8 to 10 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that, yeah.
So were the rest of the crew allowed to ever come up and see it?
No.
So once you retrieved it, then what happened?
Well, once we had got it on board, we had to then cover it. We took a bunch of tarps, and we had to cover it before we took it back into the harbor, for one thing. But also, while this was going on, one of the officers, this was before we even lifted it out of the water, one of the officers had gone by all of the windows and portholes and had taped cardboard over it, and which was not something that had ever happened, and that's just not something They did.
And these are the
And-
portholes of your boat, not this.
Of the ship,
not
yeah.
this, not
Yeah,
the
of
craft
the
that
Coast
you
Guard
were.
vessel. Yeah, no, I'm talking
Just want to be
about-
clear that people don't get
Yes,
confused.
And you know, a lot of guys were complaining, like, "What's this about?" And well, you know, he's just like, "Sorry, captain's orders."
Mhm.
And
What was the conversation like, if any, of the officers and the two of you that were enlisted up on deck as you retrieved and saw this object? What were people saying or exclaiming, or what happened?
Well, I mean, we were. I mean, I think they were just as amazed as I was. I mean, that whole scenario, even thinking back now, I mean, it was just surreal. It didn't seem like it was real.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they felt the same way. So I don't think there was any of them that were, like, in on something that,
Mm-hmm.
like, I think that we were all pretty much clueless, like, what the heck this thing was. But yeah, I think the general consensus among all of us is like, hey, it's one of those UFOs that we always see.
Mm-hmm. And did you get a sense of where you were on the ocean where you picked it up, about what your location was?
I could tell you it was probably maybe no more than 20 miles off the mouth of the harbor.
Southwest of Guam, which
It
direction?
was south.
Towards the Marianas Trench itself.
Yes. Yeah, coincidentally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is
Thought of
important
that.
information. Yes.
I hadn't thought of that, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay. So then what happened? You have it on the ship, and what ensued following that?
Okay, so we brought it back. We made it back into the harbor, and by the time we got back to the pier, I remember there was just this whole team, this whole crew of people waiting, and there was a lot of camouflage, and I noticed quite a few Air Force personnel. And I mean, that's not really surprising because there's a huge Air Force base in Guam. That's all it is, really. It's a huge Navy base and an Air Force base on the north end of the island.
Mm-hmm.
But there was, a lot of guys wearing camos, which sticks out because we wore our kind of a navy blue uniform.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, yeah, we tied up, and they just kicked us all out, basically. There wasn't much hanging around or chatter. They just wanted us gone.
Mm-hmm.
And which was interesting because usually there was kind of a little ritual we would have to do first, with a lot of cleaning involved, and because we would have to tie things down, make preparations when we'd go underway, and then we would have to come back and we would have to untie everything.
Right.
And there was just a whole lot of usual procedures that were just skipped. And they were basically just like, all right, see you, come back tomorrow. And but the 8 of us were told we had to go to a special debriefing that next morning.
And you're now referring to 8 of you that retrieved the disc.
The 8, yes, sir, specifically.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And what was that like, and where did that take place?
Yeah, that took place at MARSEC, which is that's the Coast Guard, the shore station within the harbor. So that took place. Actually, it was in the XO of MARSEC. It was in his office.
The executive officer.
The executive officer, yes.
And who else was there?
So when we showed up that day, it was a 1 or 2 star Navy admiral was the like the main intimidating presence in the room. There were a few other officers present. Coast Guard, though, that was the only Navy guy that I remember.
Do you remember his name?
That I do not.
Okay.
I don't quote me on this. I think there's a good chance that might have been the commander of the Pacific Fleet at the time. There's.
But it was an admiral.
It was an admiral.
Okay. And who else was there besides? How many people were there? The 8 of you, the admiral, and the XO, and who else?
There was, besides the admiral, I'm wanting to say there was maybe 3 others.
Okay.
That were part of the debriefing.
And do you know any of their names or recall them?
The names, no, although one of them was the executive officer of MARSEC.
Okay. And your commanding officer was there, presumably?
Yes.
And
yes,
what was his name?
He was Lieutenant Commander Corson.
Okay. And do you know the names of any of the 8 of you that were there, the other enlisted men or any of the other officers?
Yes.
Okay. And what were they?
They were, there was, hopefully I get their ranks right. There was Ensign Ryan. There was Ensign Picanu. There was Lieutenant J.G. Jarnett. There was Quartermaster 3rd Class Belial. And there was, I think, Lieutenant Feeney.
Okay.
And that's all I can remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
I've made a list before, so
Mm-hmm.
if there's any I'm leaving out now, I probably refer to that list.
Okay.
I made a few years back.
Okay. And did you actually see the craft being taken away, or no? You were
No.
okay.
And
did you hear what happened to it?
no. And nobody was really talking about it after that, or at least we weren't supposed to. So during the debriefing, they now we weren't threatened with death or anything. I've heard some pretty extreme stories from other people that were, threatened with guns and bullets, and like that would have been terrifying. But no, I was made to sign a non-disclosure agreement. We all were, and just specifically instructed that this is above top secret, I think was how they worded it. And the explanation we were given was this was an experimental naval craft.
Mm-hmm.
And to which my commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Corson, now he spoke up and objected to this to an admiral at the debriefing. So I was really proud of that, that
What did he say?
he used the word bullshit
Mm-hmm. Right.
at one point. But no, he snapped right back at him and, said that we see these things all the time. And he gave some dates, some references of, on such and such date we had observed this, and it's like, we don't have anything that can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And
How do you spell your commanding officer's last name?
I'm wanting to say Corson.
Okay.
It could be En. But,
Okay. And what else did the admiral was conducting the briefing or speaking?
Yes, he was the one that did the speaking, really.
And what else did the admiral say?
So yeah, the admiral very calmly just told him that he would be glad to speak with him afterwards, after everyone else was dismissed. And apparently they did, because we were all dismissed, and the CO stayed behind.
And what did you ever find out from your CO what the admiral told him privately?
He didn't get any more answers. I know that. I did speak with him, because I think me and the CO, we were pretty close. I think even before this incident, like this isn't like an aircraft carrier or something where you have to like put in a request if you want to speak with the captain, and it has to go through the chain of command. I mean, it's very it's more casual, and he was just a very approachable guy, you know. So yeah, we had a few private conversations, especially afterwards.
And what did he say in those? What was his comments, and was he angry or what?
He was very angry. I know he was. And not just at being lied to, but he just felt that we were all put in danger in general by pulling it out of the water, because you know, there's a lot of bad things that could happen if you overexert that heavy machinery.
Right.
And there was, yeah, he was just adamant about that. He just kept saying they put the whole crew at risk, and and I kind of agree with him on that.
Yeah. So he felt that the ship could have capsized, or what was his concern?
Probably capsize, or because of the way the cables were rigged that held the boom up, like if one of those were to snap with us on board, I mean, it could easily have just chopped right through us.
Oh, okay.
And that's all that was going through my head at the time too. Like, I did not want to be standing out there while they were trying to lift that, because we had no idea how heavy it was even.
Right.
Like we just blindly were ordered to pick it up.
Right.
And so we did.
So during this briefing, were they, you mentioned intimidating, was the stance sort of a threatening stance and intimidating?
Oh, yeah, I can say this. Now, the morning of the debriefing, that was probably one of the scariest days of my life. Just, first of all, because there was so much secrecy involved with the windows, the portholes being covered. So, like, I knew this was big. And it may have been a rational fear, I don't know, but I was convinced that, they were, gonna erase our memory, or, Men in Black style, or who knows. There was just so much going through my head at the time. And I was terrified. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a pretty intimidating experience too. There was a lot of brass in that room, and as I said, it wasn't, if you talk, we're gonna kill you, but they just said that you could be charged with treason under the UCMJ, and I think someone reminded, we all know that could carry up to the death penalty. That was mentioned.
Right.
So they made sure to throw that in there, like we didn't already know. But
and what was the non-disclosure agreement? What did it consist of? Do you remember what it said and what you signed? I mean, the gist of it, as it were.
Yeah, the gist of it, the preceding day's events basically never happened.
Really?
Yeah, and I mean, it very explicitly said is to never be mentioned again to absolutely no one.
Okay.
And it, wife, family members, no one.
Okay.
And then, I think I seem to remember him making some attempt to make us feel like it was our patriotic duty, like to honor and protect national security. I don't know. There was just something fishy about the whole thing, and certainly the CO agreed.
He expressed his opinion that he thought this was inappropriate.
Absolutely, and he was very vocal about it, right in front of the admiral. And in subsequent conversations afterwards, and he had also mentioned that all of the ship's logs had been taken at the time, which is no surprise, but
Okay. And is there anything else about the event or the aftermath and the debriefing that you recall that you think you want to share? Was it damaged, this craft? Did it have any evidence of injury, damage?
No, there was nothing visual that
Okay.
I could see. I mean, and it didn't seem like it was possible to even scratch it.
Right.
Who knows if it was harder than diamond?
Mm-hmm.
But
And was there any sound coming from it, or humming, or anything?
no, nothing.
Any heat or coolness that was unusual?
No,
No. Okay.
not that I can recall.
So it just seemed at that point it was inert. It was nothing operational about it. It was
That's correct.
sort of dead in the water, as it were.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So then subsequently to this, I think you mentioned you'd had some conversations with some other military personnel about this issue, and quite separate from this event, if you want to share any of that. You'd mentioned some special forces or people who said they've been into space.
Oh yeah. Well, on another note, like when I first got to the island, I had befriended a Navy SEAL, basically, and he was my only friend at the time. I kind of had a hard time adjusting. So, we started hanging out on a regular basis. We would, our thing, especially on the weekends, we would go to the gym on base and we would play racquetball. And so the one thing that really stood out to me about this guy was, so we went to there was a club on base that was called Club Rumors. And we were having a beer one night, and he just had a really down look on his face, and I asked him what was up and everything, and he said something to the effect of like, "What would you say if I told you that I recently came back from the moon?" So I wasn't sure where he was going with this. I remember snapping right back, like, well, what a coincidence! I just got back from Mars,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of joke. And then he didn't seem to think that was funny, and he seemed pretty adamant there was something bothering him, and that really stuck with me.
He tell you what it was, or any more detail?
Well, yeah, I mean, I ended up saying, yeah, tell me, buddy. He's like, well, you're not going to believe me anyway. And I told him, like, no, I'm open-minded. I know you're a man of integrity. So, yeah, he didn't specifically say why, but he said he had been on the moon for about 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. And did he say why, how he got there, or what he was doing?
He did not go into specifics. There was only so much he was willing to talk about. But just the whole demeanor on his face and the way he was, something was really bothering him, you know. And if it turns out like that was true, you know, I can totally get why he would be that way, because of what I have gone through for many years with this incident of my own. It's very stressful sometimes. You have to internalize this when you know there's something just out of this world, literally, and you're just not allowed to talk about it, or else it could be very damaging,
Right.
to psychologically. So, you know, that's why it really stuck with me, because it seemed like he was really genuinely hurting.
Right.
And I tried to, you know, take him seriously and tell him, hey, I believe you, you know, even though I was kind of, you know, a little skeptical, but at the same time, he had only had one beer. He wasn't like wasted or anything. So,
Right. You know, and tell me a little bit about that. I mean, we can get into, you know, how this has affected you, how it's made you feel. It's a lot to, you know, this is a modern day sort of Roswell, where you retrieved a object like this, and you know, you had to live with it till we spoke a couple years ago, I guess, the first time.
Yeah, it's been a few years now. It was, yeah, I had a really rough time in dealing with even the fallout from my shipmates immediately afterwards, because there was kind of this whole attitude on the ship, kind of a us versus them mentality between us enlisted guys and the officers. Like, you know, we kind of thought all the officers were pricks, and, you know, like, so by me being one of the ones that was privy of working with the officers on them, like, for some reason, the guys were resentful towards me for that, and I dealt with a lot of harassment and bullying, I guess you could kind of say, as a immediate result of that on the ship. Long term, though, I was terrified for years. I mean, I never once spoke about it to my wife at the time. I was diagnosed with depression about a month after that happened, and was put on antidepressants. My marriage ended up falling apart within a year. And just any time in general, if I would be talking with friends or even family members, and if a subject of, you know, paranormal or UFO type things would come up, like I would want so bad to jump in the conversation. And sometimes I would kind of hint that, you know, I was involved in something, but then I would retract, and, you know, I just had this fear.
Sure.
And it was a very powerful, overwhelming anxiety that I've dealt with for many years.
Right.
And I could just tell you how good it felt when I finally talked to you on the phone a few years back, and you listened to it, and you didn't just listen, you received it very well, and you know, you helped maybe explain a few things questions I had about it, like gave me a few possible theories about how it could have gotten there and whatnot, and it's just been such a relief since that happened.
Good.
And you know, I feel safe too. That was the big thing, was you know, I knew you have like a flawless track record with your witnesses of not being harassed, or
Has anyone tried to contact you since we've spoken and been planning to disclose this information?
No.
Yeah, and
No.
they won't.
Yeah. No, I'm confident of that now.
Yeah, I know what the system is that we have, and we'll talk about this a little later. But is there anything else that you want to share with us that comes to mind?
Well, I'd say one of the big things out of all of this, besides the many questions that I still have, is I want to know, why is that part of the world, why is it such a hot spot for UFOs? Because I think a lot of other sailors, Navy, and Coast Guard, otherwise, could probably attest, if they've spent time out there, that you see a lot of weird stuff in the skies. And, I'm just wondering of the possibility, is there maybe an ET base or something under the water there? Because
Well, we have both. So we know that there's an ET interstellar base very deep in the Marianas Trench. But we also know that there are assets that are man-made, anti-grav, what look like UFOs, that are in some of our bases out there, and also underwater. So there's a bit of a cat and mouse game going on, and I have sources, I have hundreds of them, and a number of these have been used to target when they're not way up in space, but when they're in that proximity with these electromagnetic weapons. And so I've heard of other incidences where we have retrieved objects over the years out in that part of the world. But nobody has been willing to come forward with the details. The closest was a man who, 40 years before this event, in 1963 in the South Atlantic, was the captain of a contract vessel retrieving ICBMs that we were firing downrange. And his job was to retrieve them, because they would, to get them, and they were testing the accuracy of where they would land. And there were always these ET craft that were seen in the air at the time. And one night, one appeared. They had a new radar system on board, and they called the command center, and they were able to get it, and they triangulated it and struck it. And so this thing was hit, went down, and the next morning they were vectored into the point of impact. And he never saw the craft, but the thing apparently was ruptured, and there was an ejection pod about 6 feet square that was seamless, that had 4 ET bodies in it, each about 39 inches tall, no hair, no ear flaps. The skin color about that, he said, I'm quoting, I know it's not politically correct, that of a Sicilian. So this was Captain Horn. For years, if he even went into an operation as he got elderly, there'd be an intelligence person there to be sure he didn't mention this.
Wow.
Yeah, because he actually handled the bodies, and they were ordered to put it in the ship's freezer. And later, a nuclear submarine came up beside, and some people came on and did threaten them with death. And there were suits as well as military, and they retrieved the bodies and the ejection pod. And that was ostensibly, he was pretty sure they subsequently tried to retrieve the actual object that must have been at the bottom of the ocean by then, but they knew where it went. But he didn't have any detail about the craft. He just knew about these little men. And the thing that he was most mystified by, and this connects to your experience,
was the suit, right?
The suit.
How do you get the suit off?
I've told this story before, but he said, and this is why he called me, by the way, because he wanted a scientist to explain, since there were no zippers or buttons and it was seamless, how there's no way to get in or out of these. He said, these little men, how would they ever have gotten in and out of these? And I said, well, they don't put them on and off the way you do. It's a type of trans-dimensional physics where it literally forms around them and unforms off of them. And he said the material was very fine, but a little bit metallicized. And I say it's part of their communication system that interfaces with their bioelectric field and conscious field. And so the uniform is part of their technology. But this gets back to your case, where this object had no openings, no point of egress or regress, no way to go in or out, no portals, no seams. And when there's an object like that, people always say, well, how do they go in and out? Because the cartoonish aspect of UFOs is that they're landing gears and a ladder comes down, and it's all very much a projection of how we would do things in 20th century, early 21st century manufacturing. But I said, no, an interstellar vehicle, it's formed in its totality, and the occupants go in and out through it, kind of teleported. They don't have to have an opening. And in fact, when that pyramid landed at Rendlesham Forest, the Royal Air Force Base in England, the people who were there closest to it that have gone on record with me said that the ETs were these kind of luminous, very white figures that floated from inside this black onyx-like pyramid through the opening and communicated with them telepathically. But that there was no opening. They would just kind of go through.
Wow.
Yeah. So we know how that works, and on our, we've had these experiences on our contact teams quite a bit. But yet that's why the details are important. Because if this craft had seams, rivets, things like that.
I've learned that since that could be one of ours.
Correct.
Lockheed Skunk Works, or one of the
yes,
man-made ones.
correct.
But based on what I've learned since then, whatever this was, it was not ours. I think I could conclusively vouch for that. There was none of that. None of our markings. Right. No markings at all.
Well, I want to thank you for your courage and the service you provide by giving this information on a really important retrieval case that's recent, 2002. And hopefully we'll be able to at some point have more people who were there or who subsequently handled this object down later who might come forward because of your courage. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Dr. Greer.
Thank you.